Next, we're going to look at state and zip code. Now, state and zip code are very common fields in databases. And if we go and we look at this table in our datasheet view, let's save that change of field size, you'll see that here we've got our zip codes, and some of them are the 5-digit zip codes, like this one, and some of them are the full 5 plus 4 additional number zip codes, so a total of 9. And that can get confusing. Also with phone numbers, do we include the area code or not? It can be helpful to give a guide or a template for those who are entering data into the database so that they know exactly what they should be typing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add that guide or template. In Access, those are called input masks. So let's go to zip code. Now, first of all, zip code, we really don't need it to be a number. We're never going to do math, addition, multiplication, etc. with a zip code. Or we're not going to do math with a phone number either. So we'll change those to text. Now, the other main reason why we do that is that some zip codes can actually start with 0. Zip codes up in the northeast of the United States, for example, can start with the number 0. And if it's a number field, then Access will get rid of that leading 0, and we don't want that to happen. So we're going to change that to text. The other thing is, okay, how long should zip codes be? Well, we have a couple options here. In Access, it's actually useful if we're going to add any formatting using an input mask, which we'll do in a second. It's actually useful to store spaces in the database for the symbols. So for zip code, traditionally we have 5 digits of the zip code, then a dash, and then the expanded 4 digits, for a total of 10 total digits in the zip code, including that hyphen. So we'll change this to 10. Similarly, with phone number, we traditionally have 10 numbers, an area code, and then a 7-digit phone number. But we also usually have, the most common formatting is to include a parentheses, then the area code, then a close parentheses, then a space, then 3 digits, a dash, and 4 final digits, which actually gives us 14 total characters if we include the parentheses, the space, and the hyphen in there. So we'll change this field size to 14, and we'll save that. So the next thing we're going to do is actually add our input mask. So down in our field properties, we have this input mask property. Now for input masks, you're always going to want to use the wizard. You can manually type it if you know all the symbols and things, but we're not going to cover that in this class. What you want to do is you want to move your cursor down and click into the input mask field, and you'll see this little button with an ellipsis all the way to the right hand side. Click that and it'll pop up the input mask wizard. Now there's a number of input masks that are just common to use in Access databases, and so there's actually a zip code one built right in that gives us the standard formatting for a US zip code. So we'll go and select that one, hit next. Here's what the code is for that if you wanted to actually type it in manually. What this means is that the zeros represent required numbers, and then there's a hyphen, and then there are optional numbers. And so the first 5 digits are required, and the last 4 are optional, and then there's a hyphen in the middle. And then this placeholder character, we're just going to leave it alone, is the underscore, which means that whenever we go and add new data into this field, we will have a mask or a template that looks like this. So we can, type in, our most famous zip code 90210 1234, and that's what it looks like as we type it in. That looks great to me. The other thing is, now we have to decide, how do we want to store the data? Do we want to store with the symbols or without the symbols? It's kind of a personal preference, actually. In Access, it's actually a little bit better to store it with symbols, because Access does some things that are a little complicated if you don't store it with the symbols. In a normal production database, SQL Server or Oracle, I would probably store it without the symbols. But with Access, it makes it a little easier to store it with. So we'll finish our input mask, and it creates all of that information. This is what gets created down there by that wizard. We'll go and view, we'll save our table and view it in Datasheet view. And now our zip codes have been formatted, and that if we want to type in a new zip code, then we've got this input mask kind of giving us a guide for when we type in new data. Let's create an input mask for phone number. We'll do the same thing. We've already changed the field size. We'll go and open our input mask wizard, We'll still choose the phone number one, which is actually formatted the way that we want it already. Here's what the input masks is. It has the area code. Numbers are actually optional. We could change that if we wanted. There's a placeholder character. Here's what it'll look like as we type in. We'll save it with the symbols and then hit finish. And that is, that's input masks. The next part that we will do is we want to add the position ID. Now this is a little bit tricky. What we want to do is, you'll notice the position ID is this number over here. It's a 7-character number starting with 3 leading zeros. And well, that's nice, but what if we're putting a new person into the database, a new employee? How do we know what number to put in there? Well, we can memorize them all. We can know that sales reps are a certain position and accounting is a certain position, etc. But that's kind of a pain. And so what we've done is we actually have a separate table, job positions, that has the position ID and the title of that position. So the regional manager, accounting, warehouse, sales reps, etc. And so what we want to do is we want to add what's called a lookup from the employees table here, the Part B employees table, to the job positions table. Here's how we do that. We'll open up our employees table in Design View. We'll go to our position ID. It's okay that our position ID is text. We'll change it actually to 7 characters because that's what it needs to be, and then save that. But what we want to do is we want to add this lookup. Now Microsoft Access has a terrible, terrible user interface for adding up a lookup. This is how you do it. Blame Microsoft. We pretend like we're changing the field type. So we pretend like we're changing it from text to something else, even though we're not going to change it to anything else. We're going to pretend like we are, and go and select Lookup Wizard. Lookup Wizard will bring up this wizard to create this drop-down menu, this lookup. And we have 2 options. The first one, where we can either use values that are in another table or query. Well, that's what we have here. We have another table that works for this and that we're going to pull from. Or we could type in our own values. In this case, we want to pull from another table, so let's hit next. We choose the table that our lookup values are in. It's that job positions table. We'll hit next. Here's the fields that are available. We'll select both of them in this case. And then how do we want to sort it? Let's sort it by position ID in ascending order. And here's what it will look like. Now we can choose, if we want to, whether we want to include the position ID as in that drop down with 2 columns, or we want to hide it. Well, I think it's just fine to hide it. We don't really need to see those position IDs. We could have changed it if we want to, but that looks good to me. Now, one very important thing, when you create lookups, Access has allowed these enable data integrity and allow multiple values checkboxes in the most recent versions of Access. I will tell you that for this project and for this grader, please do not touch them. Don't check them, or else it can cause some problems, and the changes are actually irreversible. It will change the structure of the database in a way that you can't actually go back. So just leave that alone and hit finish. It will save that table, and we'll go and look and see what our table looks like. So now, rather than being a number, the position ID is actually a drop-down with only the different positions available there. Looks good to me. Alright, a couple more properties that we want to change, and then we'll move on to something else. Next, we have a full-time field with a question mark. In our database, we actually have a yes and no. Those are the values of that particular field. Now, when we have data that's just a yes or no, a 1 or a 0, a true or a false, we usually use a special data type for those that in some databases is called binary, but in Access it's called a yes-no field. It actually only stores a very small amount of data, and so if that field we want to change to yes-no. Next is region. That's fine, and we've already changed the field type to 2. Salary. Now, salary is a number, but it's a special type of number. So if we look here, here's their salary, and this is a US-based paper company, and so what we want to do is we want to change the salary to currency. Now, currency is just a number, but it's one that has a high level of precision, which means it stores a lot of significant digits, a lot of digits to the right and left of the decimal place. But it also will automatically format the number using the localized currency settings. On my computer, that's dollars because I'm in the US, but if you were in another country, it would be the localized settings wherever those are. So we can change that, and it will save it. And now the salaries are all listed. They're still numbers, but they format the numbers now using the localized regional settings that are correct for that region. The last thing that we want to change here on the properties is this hire date. Now, dates in Access are simply numbers. They're actually the number of days since the year January 1st of 1900. And so we can look and we can say, oh, well, these numbers are in the range of about 37,000 to 39,000 or so. And so that's how many days until this person was hired from the year 1900. But that's not really very useful to us. And so rather than having the number there, we'll change this to a special field called a date time field. And when we do that and save it, it will now show up, okay, that's around the range of 2002 to 2006 or so, 2008 I guess or so. Even though we can still do math with them, there's still numbers behind the scenes. We can calculate if it was before or after a date by using greater than or less than. We'll do that in a minute. But dates and times are kind of a pain to work with, and so Access has this built-in date time data type for fields, which actually is very helpful in dealing with dates.